Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of Professional Advisors Working Lunches, with our partner for today being our good friends at Schroders. I'm Andrew O'Kelly with Professional Advisor, and I'll be your host today. Now, many of you will have watched last autumn's very popular session on intergenerational wealth. So following on from that, today's session takes that conversation to another level as we examine and discuss the remarkable impact on the profitability of an advice business when we focus equal attention on the spouse in the advisor-client relationship. Joining us to discuss this, we have three great expert speakers. From Schroders, their Intermediary Solutions Director, Gillian Hepburn, and two people who run quite different but modern advisor businesses, the Director of Pentins and Women's Wealth, Sam Secomb, and Philip Martin, the Managing Director of Unique Financial Planning. But before we begin our sessions today, allow me to quickly run through one or two housekeeping issues. Please, you'll notice your microphones and cameras are turned off. We'd appreciate it if you'd keep it that way, please. It just helps to keep down any background noise and makes the presentations much clearer. As I look at the list of people who have joined the meeting today, I can see some who have either a nickname or a phone number against their name. That's quite difficult for us to be able to figure out who you are against our list of registrants and therefore send you CPD later. Please keep an eye on the chat function. If you are one of those, no problem. My colleague Joe will be just sending you a little message just asking you to confirm your full name so we can send you your CPD. Q&A. There will be a Q&A session today, and that will happen at the end of the event. That said, there'll also be three sort of panel discussions as we go through the session. If you have a question to any of our panelists during those live sessions, do please put them in the chat function, and either Gillian or myself will pick up on those and hope to introduce them into that general discussion at the time. Failing that, there's a Q&A session at the end, and any that weren't asked during the sessions, I will pick up on at the end. I should tell you that today's session is being recorded, and we'll send you a link to that recording within 24 hours, along with an email which will be your proof of attendance at the seminar and therefore your CPD. So in good old CPD fashion, what are our learning objectives today? There are four. What is the specific challenge with spouses? We'll look at how can you quantify this within your business, why there's an issue in retaining female clients, and finally we'll look at practical steps that we can take to address this. So that's my bit done. Thank you for joining us. Let me hand you over now to the Intermediary Solutions Director at Schroders, who's going to lead the session, Gillian Hepburn. Afternoon, Gillian.
Hi, Andrew, and thank you very much for that introduction. It's lovely to be here this afternoon to speak about what is obviously one of my favourite topics, which I guess this year what we're doing is taking it in a slightly different direction. We talked a lot about wealth transfer over the last couple of years, and certainly, as you mentioned, the session that we did last year was really successful and very well attended. We've talked about it in relation to the challenges and opportunities and also the impact on profitability of the business if there is no wealth transfer strategy in place. However, our focus has always been around passing wealth on to the next generation, and today we're going to look at this from a completely different angle, and we're going to consider the impact of spouses, partners, and I guess in particular widows inheriting. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined, as you said, by Sam and Philip today, and they can introduce a little bit more about their business when we come on to the first section that we're going to have a bit of a debate around. I thought I'd start, however, with just a little bit of recap in terms of what this opportunity looks like. So, I mean, clearly there's loads of stats that are banded around in research, but these two always strike a chord with me. You know, about 5.5 trillion is about to move over the next 30 years from one generation to another. And some latest information in terms of the size of the average estate, it's around £406,800. So, you know, clearly a lot at stake here. And what are some of the challenges? Well, as we've always said before, around about 65% of inheritors, so typically the next generation, are likely to switch their advisor at the point of transfer. Back in 2016, 2017, now I have been accused that this is maybe a little bit out of date, but you know what, there's no smoke without fire, right? And if 15% of businesses lost up to 50% of their value due to a lack of wealth transfer strategy, then it's certainly something that we want to sit up and take notice. But as I mentioned, the focus has always largely been on engaging that next generation. And some of you may have seen these slides before, where I have been accused of being maybe a little bit cheeky and definitely a bit sexist. You know, is this the guy that manages your dad's money? Well, actually, I think this slide's really relevant to the conversation that we're going to have this morning about, you know, whose money is it and where is the first point of wealth transfer? And clearly, you know, again, as we've mentioned, turning up at the reading of the will is potentially far too late. I always talk about the advisor that mentioned they had a branded condolence card, and I think that quite frankly doesn't cut it. So we'll look at that in a bit more detail. But what about the spouses? And here's a bit that certainly made me sit up and take notice about, you know, should we be thinking about this whole wealth transfer piece from a slightly different angle? Well, interestingly, according to research done by McKinsey, about 2/3 of the baby boomer wealth is held in joint households. By 2025, interestingly, that's not that far away, 60% of the wealth in the UK will be held by women. And if you thought 65% of people changing advisor was a scary thought and potentially a challenge for the business, well, according to research, 70% of women inheriting wealth will switch advisor within 1 year of their partner passing away. And some recent research that we did here at Schroders identified that, you know, less than 10% of advisors have a strategy that particularly focuses on a proposition in advising women. So clearly some interesting, you know, some interesting facts here. I really like this slide here. I had a conversation with King's Court Trust recently, and they talked about the fact that typically it's 5 weeks between the point of somebody passing away before the financial advisor is notified. And what this slide just demonstrates is the number of steps that potentially get in the way of that, and the number of additional people that potentially speak to the widow and can offer advice. So I think certainly some interesting dynamics here. And the first question I'm keen to have a chat with Philip and Sam about is, you know, are we painting the right picture here, and do we think there is a challenge with spouses? Philip, can I come to you first with that question?
Well, self-evidently there is an issue, because the statistics would demonstrate that it is. I mean, back when I started, you know, as an actuarial student valuing pension schemes, the assumption that you used was that a female spouse was 3 years younger than the man, and their life expectancy currently is about 4 years longer than a man. So there's 7 years of lost potential relationship and lost income if you don't have that relationship right from the get-go, just on a straight, you know, on a straight numbers basis. So yes, I think unequivocally there is a challenge. What you do about it and how you address it, the practical solutions are very many and tricky, I think, and we'll come on to that later on in the session. But yes, there is. I think the first challenge is actually making sure that people are actually aware that it is a challenge. And I think in a lot of businesses, I mean, I know, you know, thinking through our own, we have 32 advisors advising on mortgages, protection and investments across a number of offices in the south. And there'd be a very, very big generational difference in the importance that would be attached to having deeper relationships across the family than there would have been more traditionally with perhaps some of the older advisors who just see the necessity for a one-to-one relationship, be that with the female in the household, the male in the household, or either, depending on on its makeup. So the first challenge, I think, is recognizing there's a problem.
Perfect. Sam, what's your thoughts on this? And tell us a bit about your business as well.
Okay, yeah. I've been in the industry for 30 years. So like Philip, I've seen it change, and I've seen different attitudes around, and I've been at a different age and a different stage in my career in financial services as I've gone through it, and things have changed. But right now, the wealth management business, Pentins, deals with mature people with wealth. You know, that is the feature of that business. And Women's Wealth, my new passion, deals with the millennial generation of women. It's aimed at people, online relationships, empowering women who are 30 years old or you know, certainly younger than the Pentins demographic. And I see two very different types of people when I meet clients in those businesses. And in the wealth management business in Pentins, very definitely the other thing that I notice, it's not only the spouse that we need to be considering. There's often a skipping of generations. And when something happens with the health or the life of one of our clients, sometimes we're speaking to not the children, but the grandchildren. You know, the passing wealth on to 50 or 60-year-olds when you die at 70 or 80 doesn't always happen. They're often very well catered for themselves already by that time, and there's a skipping in generations. So it's not only the spouse that might inherit from the partner. You know, you've got to think about who they're going to be guided by and what the relationships are in the wealth transfer thereafter.
Absolutely. So so I think what we're agreeing here is yes, there's a challenge, and hopefully it's a great starting point for today. Let's think about what that might look like for the business, and what's the impact on the business if there's not a strategy in place to make sure that the assets are actually retained at the point of transfer. I've talked a lot in the past about trying to do an audit of the business and looking at different segments and assets under management and income that's generated, and what that might look like if it moves away. But maybe in regards to this transferring across partners, we need to think about, you know, how many joint households do we manage? Do we engage with both partners? How does that work? What might be the impact if the spouse decides to change advisors? Interestingly, no big surprise, but the average age of a widow back in 2017, that was the latest stats I could find, was 75. And we've often talked about, you know, do a bit of a deeper dive. So think about who these families are within the business. You know, are they single, married? What's the level of engagement? You know, and just do a quick, you know, a quick piece of maths shows that clearly families where, or couples where there's a low engagement with the spouse might generate a challenge for the business in terms of money walking away. I've also talked always about don't just look at the invested assets, but also the impact on any property that might need to move. But why do women leave the advisor? Because that's the key for today, isn't it? You know, if we think this is a challenge, why are they leaving, and what can we do? Now, again, I'm always generalising, but this was some of the research that we managed to get our hands on. So first of all, they largely felt shut out of the conversation. You know, they felt the advisor teams only reached out to them infrequently or on sort of day-to-day matters. They felt unable to ask basic financial literacy questions. They didn't feel that the advisor spent enough time with them. And actually, they wanted to work with somebody who better suits their needs. So, you know, with that in mind, let's think about the second question here. You know, first of all, you know, Philip, in your business, in terms of, have you done any work on quantifying this, and why do you think that they might leave the advisor? Does this research ring true?
It does. I mean, I don't think we are not yet as a business in a state where I'm measuring this and I've actually quantified it as a problem for our own business. But that is as much to do with the general shape of the demographic of our client base. So we'd be unusual as a business in that the median age of our advisors is 42. You know, trying to bring that down. And with that, of course, means that the average age of the clients has not yet got largely to death and widow and widower stage. So we know we need to face into it, but I haven't collected statistics thus far. Why do they leave? I think that this will all come down to how do you start to build deeper, more meaningful relationships across a family, house and household group of whatever makeup. So I think they're leaving because the relationship doesn't exist. It's you know, it's self-evident. Two reasons: it doesn't exist with the advisor because the advisor's not gone more deeply into the household, but secondly, because the business itself has not made deep enough inroads into making a corporate relationship between itself and the household. So the relationship that does exist exists between one entity, one advisor, and the underlying single client, and that's what you need to chip away at. So, you know, we've done that. We're making steps towards that. So, for example, part of our approach to giving advice will always, at the front end with a new client, seek to do a joint fact find. Absolutely would be our standard approach. We would have a strong preference to see and engage with both partners of whatever sex right from the get-go to start that relationship in the right way. And we already have that in place.
Yeah, so it sounds like certainly it's on your radar, Philip, in terms of thinking it through the potential future impact, and then what processes can you put in place to try and address some of this?
Yeah, I mean, if you're building a business in order to make your advice business valuable rather than to just generate income, this is the same conversation we had around intergenerational planning. There is absolutely no point trying to build a business, whether it's mortgage or assets under management for investment, to not have mitigating strategies in place for what happens when these assets come off at the back end. You know, it's a labour of Hercules to push the stone uphill. You don't want it to terribly easily fall downhill, do you?
No, absolutely. And Sam, what about your business? Have you got a view on this? You know, why women might leave and seek another advisor, and whether you've looked at the impact?
I mean, I absolutely resonate with what Philip was saying about trying to make sure that the organisation has a relationship with a client, not just an individual in that organisation. And I think that builds in some protection for the business, but for the client as well. You know, one person is an awful lot to pin your financial well-being on. You know, if they're not available to you, you need somebody else in the team who will look after your interests. And all our suitability reports, for example, we don't use the word I. It's we're an organisation, a team, not one person, you know, looks after everything that the client needs doing, and we don't pretend that that's the case. So I think if they know that the organisation is looking after them, then they're more inclined to talk to anybody that they need to talk to within that. So they're not dependent on one person. I think the other thing is that from our business perspective, we've created an entirely new brand, which is designed at attracting a different generation of clients, recognizing that each business is learning from the other. So the new brand learns from the traditional IFA practice, and the traditional IFA practice is learning from the new brand. The new brand was very much more technology focused in terms of its delivery mechanisms and relationships with clients. And when we hit COVID, we were so grateful that we had the skills in-house to do that, because we were able as an organisation to adopt in the IFA practice the technology that we needed to carry on communicating with clients. Not all our clients were as quick to adopt it, because I say they are more mature. But you know, it is a question of, we have recognised that one brand is designed to appeal to a generation, and that generation is not going to have the money under their control forever. So we're meeting in the middle as we learn different skills and different ways of communicating with different generations of people.
Sure. I mean, I've heard a lot, certainly in the last year, about the use of technology, particularly in terms of engaging, and particularly in terms of engaging wider families, and particular couples. You know, Philip, is that something that you're experiencing as well in the business?
It is. I mean, I think we'll begin to start to think about some of the practical things to address these problems. But I think in our business, there's no doubt that the technology that we've had to harness as a result of lockdown, you know, Zoom, FaceTime, Teams, whatever you're using, actually, once advisors got their heads around the remoteness, particularly those who are used to having direct, you know, look into your eyes kind of engagement, has been very, very strong. But one other byproduct of it is that it's far, far easier to arrange review meetings with both adult members of a household than it would be if you're trying to meet them face to face, just in practical terms, because two people don't have to take the time off work to travel to a single destination and be there at the same time. So it actually opens up all sorts of opportunities to start to create a normality around engaging with multiple people in the household, just purely by virtue of the fact that we're having to do it.
Yeah, so
that's positive, I think.
Absolutely. So going back to that point on the previous slide about women potentially feeling largely ignored, I think there's things that we can do to address that. But of course, if we look at the generation that are currently passing on wealth, they are quite specific, aren't they, in terms of that demographic? And you know, we spoke earlier, didn't we, when we were preparing for this, about some of those women, you know, clearly typically not working and almost you know, denied access in some ways. I think you mentioned that, didn't you, Philip, about bank accounts and
yeah, I mean, I said it jokingly, but it's perfectly serious. Remember, I mean, part of this generation couldn't open its own bank account; it wasn't allowed to. You know, ridiculous as that now is, you know, is self-evidently to all of us. So, you know, access, and I think that, I mean, this is a personal view, and it's anecdotally, but that has to have bred, you know, a certain element of that sort of deferential view that men know about money and women don't, which is just nonsense, because women had to budget in households for years and put money in tins and made sure that there was enough food left on a Thursday before payday on a Friday. It's always been a nonsense. And I think that really takes you into, I mean, it would be great to see some deeper research into this, but I think the idea that you just need more female advisors to engage into females in households is as daft as you need more men to engage with men. It's to do with skills and who has them and who doesn't have them. You know, we'll have loads of female clients who prefer, for whatever reason, to engage with a male advisor, and we should be able to access that and not impose our assumption that women only want to deal with women. Some do, of course they do, but many will not.
Yeah, of course. Sam, have you got anything to add on that point?
I agree, actually. The research that I've looked at about what clients want from an advisor, clients aren't demanding, even female clients aren't demanding female advisors. There isn't evidence that is. There are a lot of other hygiene factors which are way more important to them than the gender of their advisor. Their qualifications, their trustworthiness, their availability, and through what mediums, you know, face-to-face or online, and all of those things are way more important to them than the gender of their advisor. I do think that democratizing financial advice by having more advisors is really important to the price point at which advice is available, and that what financial services isn't doing very well is making it an attractive profession for women. So there is a lack of female advisors. That's not because there's a lack of demand for female advisors. It's because it's not an attractively packaged proposition for women at the moment. So I think there's more demand for us to change that as an industry and make it more attractive for women as a career than there is from clients to have female advisors.
I'd completely agree with that, obviously. I mean, I think what we're needing to do, I mean, almost as a business, I'm thinking this ourselves in terms of assessing our own advisors, is have a far better understanding of where people's strengths and weaknesses lie relatively in terms of how they give advice. So who's more empathetic than somebody else? Who's a better listener than somebody else? You know, who's guilty of mansplaining? But let's acknowledge you can womansplain as well. Do you know what I mean? It's not uniquely restricted to men to be patronising, you know, talkative idiots. You know, they just don't have a noun for it yet. So I think it's more about how we can ensure that we've got enough of a breadth of skills to be able to meet the requirements that individuals, because they are individuals, have.
Yeah, and absolutely. And to Sam's point, I know at the moment, I think the numbers are around about 28% of financial advisors are women, but it's much, much higher at that lower age group, which is great. So clearly, as an industry and as a profession, we are attracting more women, which has got to be good, given, you know, the demographics that we're seeing and the wealth that's transferring to women. We're also seeing more women as entrepreneurs as well. So there's a whole number of factors at play here, and we have started to talk about, you know, what are women's needs and how we can support them. And I guess, you know, our message is, well, clearly there's an opportunity in some respects for, you know, kind of what I would call focused advice. But what does that look like? You know, often people talk about, well, we just need a different proposition, and I'm not entirely sure that we do in terms of product. It's all about what sits around that. So, you know, some of the research that was quite interesting to us was that again, always generalizing, but women said that they felt unpracticed in making financial decisions. I'm not sure that's entirely true, but certainly they were very much focused more on life goals, concerned about health and longevity. And I love this last one, are more averse to risk. I'm not sure about that. I just think maybe there's more of a risk awareness, but maybe that's something we could debate. But clearly life, you know, life events are drivers for them. And they're more likely to seek an advisor where there's a sort of personal fit, which we've talked about around. And interestingly, the research said they also wanted to help with cash management. I'm not sure if that's a symptom of aversity to risk, but maybe that's back to this whole education piece on risk and reward and the benefits of investing as opposed to holding in cash. But I think the last point there was, you know, they were twice as likely, you know, to pay more for, you know, face-to-face advice, and certainly with somebody that was aligned to them. So clearly some interesting points there in terms of what can we do as financial advisors to make sure that we are retaining these women and supporting them and making sure that we're addressing their needs. Any thoughts on that one? Maybe Philip, I'll come to you first.
Well, there's loads in that, isn't there? I mean, I think so. Several things to pick up on that. I mean, I think we've got to be careful in our definition of spouse. This is not just the wife in a male relationship. It could be the male in a male relationship. It could be the female partner in a same-sex female relationship, couldn't it? So I think the thing for me is that I think we want to be able to offer an opportunity to engage fully with the household and to understand, and for both parties to understand the plan which has been put in place. But I don't think we've got the right to impose that as our only route of working. And I think we should recognise that in many households there are clear delineations around who does what. I mean, you know, I know my partner's not allowed anywhere near a kitchen, and likewise anywhere near a washing machine. And that, you know, that happens, doesn't it? You know, and there will happen that irrespective of which sex you are, somebody might naturally take the lead on the money. And therefore, at the planning stage, it might be appropriate that is only dealt with one person. But I think it is appropriate as you review plans or as you're putting protection in place and you're explaining the what ifs and the downside scenario, that the person who's going to be most greatly affected by that understands what's put in place and what the impact would be. And I think if you can dial up and dial down the engagement, then you've got an opportunity to deepen the relationship without it seeming stifling as this is our only way of working, and every time we see you, I expect to see you both, because naturally, you know, people will take the lead, won't they? I don't know if that's your practical experience too, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, it is my experience that there are natural divisions in how couples share the workload of living, and you have to respect that. We have to respect everything about our clients. We are their servants. You know, although we have a professional obligation to make sure that things work out well for them and that there's a level of understanding that's appropriate for them, at the end of the day, we're serving their needs. So they do get to have a say in who's going to lead or not, or whether they're going to share it. I heard a great description which I use with clients, where I talk about being on a journey together, where either I can drive, they can navigate, one can be the passenger, or I'm happy to navigate and one of them drive. But we do have to all be in the bloody car, otherwise it doesn't work, you know. So it helps them understand that there are different roles for them to play, as well as for me to play as an advisor, or for the advisory practice to play in delivering what an advisor might promise.
And it would be helpful if we all knew the destination that we were driving to.
Well, roughly, you know. There might be some detours.
Yeah.
Never quite. There's always the possibility of roadworks, isn't there?
Yeah, stopping on the motorway cab.
So I completely agree with this business with women having a different general approach to finances. When I talk to men and women separately, there's a whole different dynamic that happens when you bring them together, which I think is something that as a financial planner you have to learn and you have to develop professional skills around. If you ask a man a set of questions separate to his wife, or the wife's set of questions separate to, or not even wife, as you said, just partners, sometimes it's parents and children, you get different answers if you ask the questions when they're all in the room. So if you don't understand that as an advisor, you need to work on some skills around that. Because you can be misled or end up really alienating yourself with part of the relationship group if you take the answer in the group meeting as gospel. So understanding that about people it's a very powerful professional skill. And we need to develop that. But women will always tend to talk to me about security issues, and everything about this research speaks to that. They say that they're more risk averse, but I think you're right. I think they're more risk aware. And I think it's a very unmasculine thing to say you're scared. So men tend to be a bit more reluctant to admit to a feeling of anxiety or risk around a subject. So, you know, I think that's probably what comes out in that research. And when you talk to a man about what wealthy looks like, and these are huge generalizations, but it is 30 years of experience talking here. When you talk to men about what wealthy and rich look like, you know, there are a lot of status symbols about lifestyle and things like that. And for a woman, it's normally much more about, I need to know it can never all just be taken away from me overnight. I need to know that the kids are sorted, you know, and there are a lot more security things that come up that flag up as identifiers of a, you know, a wealthy, well-managed life. So you're dealing with different animals. They're genetically, we're born differently to serve different purposes and keeping the human race going. You know, one of us is supposed to be guarding the territory and hunting and gathering, and the other one is supposed to be feathering nests and nurturing children. And it doesn't matter what you say about anything, we are all human beings and we were born with genetic programming that the race continues. And denying that doesn't help. Recognizing that we're different and that we have different focuses and we come from different places allows all of us to get what we need out of managing our finances and our wealth.
Yeah. Philip, what's your view? I'm really keen on the discussion around risk averse and risk aware. What do you think? What's your experience in this? And when you're dealing with maybe couples, does this come up as a challenge?
Yeah, I think the definition here is really critical, isn't it? Because, I mean, we know perfectly well that the overwhelming majority of the country is undersaved for retirement. Sure. So you can be as averse to risk as you like, but if the pot isn't going to provide what you expect it to, we're going to have a conversation about risk. And that means you're either going to have to cut your cloth, save more and spend less now, or you're going to have to take more risk in the hope that the pot's bigger and meets your expectations. So I think, in some respects, having those two views is actually quite helpful to bring it together into a single, more overarching conversation about the need to take risk, which is very different to I don't like it, but perhaps you need it, you know, and perhaps you're going to have to get yourself accustomed to the fact that you need it in order to achieve what you want. So I think I see that actually as a positive attribute, to have a far more detailed and informed conversation about the risk that needs to be taken on. And you're right, Sam, just picking up one of your other points, risk comes in many forms, you know, from the volatility of what's happening to, you know, which makes me unsettled, to the pot isn't going to be big enough, or to I'm going to run out of cash, you know, which, you know, these are all very, very different. So, or to be protected, you know, which I've alluded to obviously in our own business, to make sure that the unforeseen is covered. So I think there's a lot of positivity in that difference of approach, I would say.
Sure. Can I pick up on as well, you know, I hear a lot about people saying, well, what we just need for women in order to retain them in the business and help us out, particularly thinking about that long-term future proofing, is that we need a different proposition. Is that true? I mean, we've talked a lot about how we speak to women, how we deal with them, but what do we think people mean by a different proposition, or is that just a general, all-encompassing statement?
I do think that there are some financial services was born out of stockbroking and in the insurance industry, so it is still focused on transactions. And there is an element of sales that women are averse to, you know, and I think if you try and treat some women clients the way that the men were introduced to the business 40 years ago, they won't respond to that. So I think probably what we hear here is that some very established businesses who used to attract clients one way are finding that way doesn't work with women. Well, it won't, you know. But I don't think that that's necessarily the way the majority of modern practices behave anyway. It's certainly contrary to what the regulator is expecting of us post RDR. So, you know, I think as a profession, we're young. We're a young profession born out of a sales industry. So the way we used to attract clients isn't the way we're doing it now. And it's certainly, so if that's what they mean by a new position, then right on, they need a new proposition. But I don't think you necessarily need a new proposition because you want to be attractive to women. I think you can have a proposition that's attractive to clients because it does the right thing by them.
Totally agree with that. I mean, I think when you talk about proposition, people tend to, in the way our industry does, just immediately go to transaction and to product and just assume what you're talking about is how do you fulfill the advice? And the advice should be the same irrespective of how it's fulfilled. They're two entirely separate parts of planning, aren't they? So I think, to me, the proposition needs to change to the extent that it needs to be mindful of how it talks to people, and that it needs to talk to people in different ways, be they male or female, and in, you know, whatever combination. So I think to that extent, propositions need to change. But do I believe, for example, I need to have, you know, an ESG portfolio with a bit of greenwashing and 0.5% of my profits going to charity in my documents that I give to women, which I don't give to men? No, I don't. You know, I think you just need to be doing the right thing. Think about how you're fulfilling it and do that consistently across the client base.
Sure.
Do you think there's some recognition needed in the fact that there are some significant generational differences? That, you know, we do some lasting power of attorney and will work in the business because every financial plan needs a tidy ending, and we find it they just weren't getting done. So we started to do them in-house. And when we're talking to the next generations about, you know, life and how things look for them and getting to know them, we do notice that there are very big differences, and we'll be talking to the millennial grandchildren of Gramsci's, and they'll be going, what have you been investing in, Grandad? You know, they're like absolutely horrified. So
I think that's absolutely bang on, and I think we're just miles behind really properly understanding that. My favourite anecdote about that was at a presentation when somebody retold that the biggest single identifiable cohort amongst millennials are vegan, identify as vegan, and yet if we're putting portfolios together that are ESG and whatever way done, you know, everyone goes straight to tobacco and arms. But if you put a sausage manufacturer in, that's going to be just as alien to part of that group as arms manufacture. And yet in you know, design and construct of these things, I think we're miles away from making those look appealing and within the value sets, which are, I think you're correctly identifying, are changing far more rapidly than people of my age are recognizing and responding to. I mean, it's a very extreme example, but you take the point.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I mean, do we think, I think some of the research also indicated that women are more likely to want to invest in a sustainable way. Is that something that you find when you work with women?
Yeah, absolutely. 98% of the women's wealth clients, members, invest with an ethical screen of some kind.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So I guess it's important to have that within the available proposition, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but is it that because they're women, or is it because we aim the business for younger women?
Yeah.
You know.
Yes, it could be both.
Yeah.
It could be both. It could be both. I was going to mention actually that within one of our sustainable funds, we do hold Greg's. That's a whole other conversation, Philip. But I will explain the sustainability. I will explain the sustainability messages separately.
The good news is that the meat component is actually a relatively low proportion.
It's all about the S and the G as well, isn't it? You know, it's all about people and planet. So some interesting debates. In terms of what else we need in the armoury to make sure that we don't lose that spouse at point of transfer. Are there any other practical things that you think we should be looking at as an industry?
Is that to me first?
Either, yeah, on you go, Philip.
I mean, I've mentioned it once before, and it is a bit of a big bugbear of mine. I mean, ours is a generalist business, so we cover it, and most of our new client base comes in as the relatives or referrals on from wealth clients where they're younger and they're needing a mortgage. It's one of the reasons why we want to continue operating in that space. But to me, the absolutely obvious way to be doing this is ensuring that people are properly protected. And of course, there are so many wealth businesses that just lose the skills to talk about protection or regard it as beneath them because they used to be insurance salesmen and somehow they've graduated on to not requiring to do that. And it just seems like such an obvious slam dunk of a way to start to engage a wider family in the family finance debate, because not only are you talking about what's going to happen in various unpalatable situations that other people don't want to talk about, but if that protection's written in trust and the kids or the wife is a trustee, you have a natural conversation about the role of the trustee and what's expected of you and what's going to happen if things happen. So it just feels like such an obvious route in to start to doing it, and at the same time doing the planning properly. So I would just love to see more of that happen. All the stats about how underprotected we are well known and well traversed, and it just feels that wealth firms need to start to re-engage with this and not regard it as slightly beneath them.
You're absolutely right. That's something we've talked about when we talk generically about wealth transfer, isn't it? Is you might have to go back and review exactly what's in the armoury here, particularly if you are dealing with not so much just the spouses, but that next generation. And also, I think, isn't it easier if we're thinking about soft skills and conversations, to have conversations about those sorts of areas, particularly wills and power of attorney and what that actually means, as opposed to talking about the financial amounts that are about to pass from one generation to the next. That's sometimes when we all get a bit angsty, isn't it? In terms of talking the pounds and pence, if I could describe it like that. Sam, have you got any thoughts on that one?
From a strategic point of view, in terms of the industry or profession, whatever you want to call it, that is the debate, really. I think that it's becoming clearer to me that we need our professional bodies to behave like professional bodies and our regulator to be a regulator. So the Financial Conduct Authority regulates the transactions that we do as advisors. And our professional body, I think we could do with way more training and input and guidance on the professional skills of being a financial planner. And we still get our professional bodies teaching us to do transactions. And I think we're just still too focused on transactions from an awful lot of perspectives. And until we stop doing that, we're not going to have the well-balanced businesses that teach clients how to think and manage their money in a more effective way. Yes, it'll involve transactions, but actually they're a small part. If you think about all the things that we're talking about here, wills and power of attorney and trust documents and intergenerational transfers and all this, there's no transactions necessary in that lot, none. The transactions are something that happens at a kind of asset allocation type level when you're talking about individual tax situations. They're tactical moves, aren't they, in the strategy. So I think if we could lift ourselves, especially the professional bodies, especially if they could lift themselves to the kind of professional side of it, I think it would be massively beneficial to all of us.
Yeah, there's a really interesting comment being put in the chat, so I'm trying to multitask here. Somebody has mentioned that when meeting couples, they often feel that it's the man that's trying to control the conversation. And it's back to one of the points I talked about earlier in terms of women being afraid to ask what they felt like were basic financial sort of questions. And I suppose there's 2 points there. One is, who's controlling the conversation, I guess, but the second one, and I think both of you have mentioned it in some of this discussion, is all around financial education. And what can we do here and how can we approach it? Does anybody want to pick up on that point?
I think that imagining as a financial planner that you are ever going to have enough skills to relationship coach a couple where the man won't let the woman speak is a little bit ambitious. You know, and I do think we need to understand that as financial planners, as well-being coaches around finance, we still have very great limitations on what we're going to be able to achieve in terms of relationship management with the, you know, the clients with each other. I think you have to have professional skills in place which allow you to at some point make sure you're talking to them individually. So that and I do have a method where I actually kill the husband off, and we do it quite jokingly, and I say, actually, you're dead now. So what I need to do is ask your partner what they're going to be saying to me under those circumstances, and of course they all have a little bit of a laugh and what have you, but it does make the point, doesn't it, that actually we need a silence here, because at some point the decisions are going to have to be made by the person in the room who hasn't yet spoken. So
that's really interesting. Fill that pot by yourself.
Well, I think the one observation I'd make to that is that I don't think we should just be limiting our assumption that having the other party, you know, participating verbally in a meeting necessarily means that we've developed a relationship with them or that it's evenly balanced. I mean, I think our obligation here is to explain what the plan is and where we are and what we're doing, what the remedial actions are, in a language that both people have the opportunity to tap into if they wish, you know, that doesn't, you know, isn't burdened with jargon, is well explained and is properly documented and followed up in a document that somebody might want to read. And then I think that's probably as far as you can go, and you just keep chipping away to the point that people want to be more proactive in driving the plan forward. But I think the form of communication isn't just limited to did they participate and say something.
Sure. Now I think we've got about 15 minutes to go, and there's some discussions coming in on the chat. I am keen, Andrew, do you want to join in this conversation at this point, and then we can pick up on any questions as well that are potentially coming through?
Yes, absolutely. And again, in sort of rather dull CPD style, just let's quickly run through those learning objectives that we've covered today. The specific challenge with spouses: how can you quantify this within your business? Why is there an issue retaining female clients? And then practical, we've also talked about some practical steps we can take to address this, and I'm sure we'll continue to do this. I'm just looking here, another comment. Stephanie writes, I've had one lady tell me I was the first person she came across in all service who spoke to her rather than asking for her husband. In fairness, she did control the money, but she was fuming with the guy doing the conservatory upgrade as he never acknowledged her. I'm sure that that's an issue that many people have faced.
I did, Andrew, just on that same point, I did read a brilliant tweet the other day from somebody saying that one of their best friends had that experience. For the past 5 years, she and her husband had driven their car in for its MOT, and every single year, the person running the garage had only ever spoken to the man and utterly ignored her. And the fact that she was actually a senior director operating in a Formula One garage was a factor and a piece of information that she was holding back just for the correct moment to drop.
It is shocking in this day and age that, you know, that those stereotypes sadly still continue to pervade the industry, but you know, things are changing. A couple of questions in practical terms. How do you ensure you have those correct skills in the business to engage with different family or household members?
Diversity, we know the answer to this. You're not a financial planner without knowing what diversity looks like. If you have a very focused group of people running a business, then they will fail to appeal to other groups of people. If you have a diverse team and you work at being open-minded and make sure that you are inclusive in your thinking and your generation of ideas and things for the business moving forward, then you will appeal to a more diverse audience. And I don't think it's rocket science. I think we know it. I just think that financial services is quite full of small businesses that are run by powerful personalities. So they naturally end up serving a smaller group of people. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But if you want to be more diverse, you're going to have to get a more diverse team together.
Sure. And Philip, how does unique financial planning deal with that?
So I think I think that's absolutely spot on what Sam has just said, and there's nothing wrong with that. If that's the sort of business you're running, that's fine. But just don't expect that you're building more and more intrinsic value into your business, because the relationships are likely to die off with you, and you've done nothing to replenish them. And people need to understand that. So I think the only way I think you genuinely can get that diversity is actually being of a significant size yourself, because there are two things that need to happen. I mean, I think we are able to bring in and invest the time in young advisors, trainees, people that we've, not just even graduates that we've brought through, but apprentices that we've brought through to become advisors, because we're able and we have the internal resource to mentor them in things beyond their learning in the soft skills. So that needs a size and a scale to be able to do that, really. So I think it is a bit of a byproduct of having that size and scale, but it's absolutely essential. I mean, our hiring policy for advisors, if I were faced with two in front of me and I had one at 25, needed a couple of years of work in order to bloom, or one at 55, the path of least resistance historically would have been to take the older advisor with the accumulated assets and just on you go. But we're trying to build a business that's going to be around in 50, 60, 70 years time. And so I need to hire youth. And therefore, just entirely as a byproduct of how we're running the business, we're bringing that diversity through. It's just a nice... I guess I'm doing the opposite, Philip, because Women's Wealth is very focused on being attractive to women, but it also recognises that in choosing its marketplace and its demographic, that it is excluding and less attractive to others. This is all just matching up.
Yeah.
Who's delivering your offer with what your offer is and who's targeted to.
Yeah.
In any other, this is just a sales and marketing plan, isn't it? It's matching up the supply and the demand. I totally agree with that.
But I think there is this mentality that a mature advisor who's run a lifestyle business for decades all of a sudden wants to appeal to another generation, and it's not going to happen unless the business is developed so that it has another generation.
I mean, it's one of the merits actually of our model is that as our advisors become older and want to leave and retire, there's a natural revised audience of advisors to take that client base on, and it can happen in a very, very seamless way. But if I were running a 2 or 3, 4 advisor business, you're not going to be able to do that. It's limiting, isn't it?
And I guess it's an interesting point, isn't it? In terms of you've both talked about maturing businesses and succession planning in some ways, and this is really the whole, for many advisors is one of the key challenges around the whole wealth transfer piece, whether that be to the next generation or to a surviving spouse. It's about the potential future valuation of that business, as many advisors are looking for exit strategies of different types, many of which are predicated on that business valuation. And we constantly hear of acquirers who are looking at what's the demographic within the business and what's the strategy for retaining those assets. So I think it's a really relevant conversation in terms of how do we make sure that our business is set for survival. Yeah,
I agree with that.
Another question here, and it sort of follows on quite nicely. We've talked about the skills and how you ensure that you have the correct skills. But is it important that those skills are, or is it the case that those skills are just needed within the advisors within the business, or further across the right across the business?
I think that there is definitely in new generation businesses that I see doing really well, and in Women's Wealth is very much on this model. It's almost a flip. So instead of imagining the advisor being the pinnacle of the business with a relationship with the clients, we see the advisor as being a technical role, a supervisory role, and to give each advisor kind of 12 heads facing the clients, it's actually the the people below, or who aren't yet authorised to advise, who are building relationships with clients. They're trained money coaches, so they're coaching clients and building relationships and helping clients understand risk and reward and asset allocation and all of these things, which are really important to their progress in terms of being able to make financial decisions. And it's not until all of that work is done that a regulated advisor parachutes into the relationship that the money mentor has with a client to oversee regulated activity. But it's way down the line. So I think that business model where actually the client owners aren't the advisors, aren't the regulated advisors, that's turning it on its head a bit, isn't it? And I think that there are businesses out there where more and more the relationship with clients is devolved through the business and isn't dependent on one person, where the value is perceived to be.
Sure. And Philip, what's your model in this regard?
Exactly as Sam has articulated it. So we've worked hard over the past couple of years to start to deepen the relationship that the clients have with the business, give visibility to the client support team, help and aid understanding when inquiries are far better directed to that team than through an advisor who just acts as a post box anyway, in order to get the answer, to do far more in the way of centralized marketing. So our advisors don't send any material on to clients that would be ongoing updated information. That's all done centrally by us, so that we have a consistent delivery and a consistent message. And I know that people who pay the same for a service all receive exactly the same, rather than lacking that control. So there's a whole range of things that you can do to start to turn. I mean, people have long talked about one-to-many, but I describe it as a corporate relationship where I want the client to feel that they have an engagement with unique financial planning and unique wealth, not with Bob.
Gillian, any thoughts? Anything to add to that, or it's fairly comprehensive answers from two?
Yeah, no, I think what we've had is, obviously a really interesting debate in terms of, we're starting to look at wealth transfer slightly differently. Let's not always focus on millennials and the next generation, but if it's really true that up to 70% of surviving spouses will change advisor, then is it a challenge for some of the businesses out there? What do they need to do? How can they quantify that and think about it, and what's the impact? And then what do we need to put in place to make sure that it doesn't have some long-term implications? So I think there's been a great discussion today, recognition of the challenge, and then thinking about what we need to do to put in place to make sure that we're addressing it. I think it's clear that it's not just about putting a female advisor in the business, but it's equally not about having a different proposition for women. It's about a whole range of different things, isn't it? So it's not just about products and investments. Actually, I think what it is more about is engagement and also education. Yeah.
Agree.
Well, there we are. Thank you very much. We're coming to the end of our time now. I think, oh, there we are. We could have had some Q&A, and we just have. But just to thank everybody for those people who sent in their questions. I want to thank our speakers. Before we sign off, let me just tell you about one or two upcoming digital events. The next one is next week. For those of you interested in multi-asset, we'll be running our annual Professional Advisor Multi-Asset Masterclass. And you can see presentations from Baillie Gifford, Benchmark Capital, Brooks Macdonald, HSBC, Hawksmoor and Morningstar, with keynote presentations from Pan Andreas at De Facto and Dan Kemp at Morningstar. Back then to our working lunches, and by the way, basically these will be happening every other Wednesday throughout the year. On the 24th of March, we've got Ruffer talking about, has COVID blown a hole in your asset allocation model? And then Dynamic Planner on the 7th of April will be addressing the subject of suitability, sustainability and risk. We will be in touch with you about all of those events going forward. But if you've enjoyed today's session, you might also want to make a note of the next in this series of intergenerational wealth. And Gillian will be returning for the next Schroders session on the 26th of May. There are other events in between, of course, and we will be letting you know what they are. So that's what's upcoming. All that remains for me to do today is to thank our three speakers, to Philip, to Sam, and to Gillian. Thank you all very much indeed for a really enlightening and entertaining presentation today. But most importantly, let me save the bulk of our thanks to you, our viewers. Thank you for tuning in today. We've enjoyed your company. I hope you found this useful, and we look forward to seeing you again in the not too distant future. Thanks very much again. Bye-bye.